Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us back to the Old West, but specifically to the border of Oregon and California. This area is still pretty wild, but back in the mid-1800s, it was only populated by brave souls who understood the risk to their lives in the forests surrounding them. In those days, the steep and foreboding granite peaks were covered with pine, fir, and spruce trees, and packed with deadly animals like cougars, wolves, black bears, as well as brown bears. Sure, there were lots of deer, elk, and maybe even moose, but you risk your life hunting them while surrounded by this murderer's row of apex predators. In the 1860s, the West still had plenty of grizzlies, and they presented a dangerous menace to anyone who managed to cross them, which was apparently easy to do. In the year 1869, in the Oregon wilds of Jackson and Klamath Counties, a giant grizzly made the canyonlands of the Siskyou Mountains his hunting grounds. When a rancher would investigate any of the many cattle this giant bear would kill, enormous tracks would lead away from the partially eaten carcass, creating a sense of fear. There were many grizzlies in this area, and even several who would kill and eat livestock, but none had the tracks of this bruiser. In the most remote expanses of the forest in this area, giant wild grizzlies could still be found, but not all of them were intelligent, crafty, and easily identifiable like this one. At Fall Creek, woodsman and rancher Bruce Grieve had set a bear trap in an attempt to capture and kill one of the many bears, killing his livestock. At one point, Grieve's bear trap had caught the forefoot of a huge bear, and in tearing itself loose, it had severed 3 of its claws. As an adaptation to the missing toes and claws, the bear turned its paw outward, toward the side as it walked, giving it a clear and discernible track each time it struck area livestock. In time, the less cautious grizzlies were thinned out, but the wise, crafty, and deliberating grizzlies like old Reelfoot would persist. Despite his injured front foot, old Reelfoot was renowned to kill a steer as quickly as most bears would kill a calf. He even had a distinct way of hunting and killing the livestock he pursued. He was known to survey cattle from an elevated position. Using his power and speed, old Reelfoot would catch up to any cattle that caught his eye and plow into them with all of his weight, knocking them to the ground. He would clamp his powerful jaws onto the spine just behind the shoulders of the cattle and crush the bones, crippling the animal immediately. Carcasses of bulls, cows, and steers would often be found with his telltale killing methods surrounded by his massive and unique tracks. Now, ranchers were not about to take these losses lying down. They'd purchased and set out steel-jawed traps all over their ranches, hoping to curb the predation of their livestock. But these efforts all ended in failure as the giant old bear would slip away to resume his cattle hunting in greener pastures. Even paid professional hunters couldn't catch up with old Reelfoot, at least not enough to put an end to him. Just like old Ephraim, old Reelfoot would kill livestock and eat his fill. Most bears would stick around and defend the carcass in order to consume as much of it as they could, but not this bear. He would be gone onto the next cow or bull by morning time. It almost seemed like he enjoyed the killing as much as he enjoyed the eating. As old Reelfoot was pursued, he would use the cover of the forest to put distance between himself and hunters, so much so that horse-mounted hunters couldn't keep up. Not only his remarkable tracks gave his location away, but a long trail of dead livestock were left in his wake as well. Ranchers got together and piled up a nice bounty of $2,700 for his hide. Now that doesn't make me want to grab my rifle and go after a giant grizzly that no one else can catch or kill, but back in those days it was a lot of money. Motivated hunters ventured into the forest and some even found old Reelfoot's tracks, but none reported seeing the elusive bear. It seemed like he knew what the hunters would do before they did, then he would escape from their sights at just the right moment. In the spring of 1882, a rancher by the name of J.D. Williams was herding his sheep near Bald Mountain around Ashland, Oregon. In the valley below his herd of sheep, Williams could see several cattle grazing. He knew the cattle belonged to another rancher by the name of David Horn. Williams noticed a giant bear burst out of the tree line, and he scrambled to climb the nearest tree. From this vantage point, Williams watched as old Reelfoot rushed in and killed a calf. The cow tried to protect her calf, but the bear killed her stone dead with a single swat from its paw. The herd bull charged old Reelfoot and bowled him over. Growling as he rose, the massive bear charged after the bull in a prolonged pursuit. Once the bear caught the bull, he crushed its spine with a powerful bite and returned to finish eating the calf. After eating his fill, old Reelfoot was observed wallowing in a nearby mud hole and then wandered off. George Cook was a local hunter who pursued old Reelfoot, as the bounty offered by the stockmen would make it worth the effort. He stalked the mountains for weeks with his .38-55 hunting rifle, and his efforts eventually paid off, kind of. He managed to get within range of the bear and fired a single shot before the bear disappeared. Cook followed a diminishing blood trail before giving up the pursuit, knowing he had merely wounded the giant bear. One of the stockmen by the name of William Wright decided the best way to get rid of old Reelfoot was to rig up a trap gun. Now, if you don't know what a trap gun is, listen up. It's a hunting rifle or shotgun bound to a tree or staked to the ground. Then a tripwire is set so that when an animal, or a person, pulls the tripwire tied, it fires. The downside of such a rig is that any animal that comes along could trip the gun. But using the proper bait, say, like a cow carcass, it just might lead to success in ending old Reelfoot's cattle wrestling days. Wright set up his trap gun in such a way that the only way the gun would fire was if the bear was right next to the cow carcass he was using as bait. He was more than sure of his setup and thought for sure that if this bear showed up, he would be dead. A few days after setting the trap gun over the bait, Wright decided to check on the rig. To his dismay, the carcass had been dragged away, and the entire trap gun rig was completely untouched. The bear had crept in and pulled the cow carcass from right in front of the trap gun without getting shot. The only way this could have been done was for the bear to understand the purpose and design of the rig, according to Wright. As Wright examined the scene, he could see old Reelfoot's tracks circle the bait, then approach from the downhill side of the carcass and direction the trap gun was aimed. He then leaned on a tree with one paw while reaching out with his other to pull the carcass from in front of the trap gun. Wright tried several more times to kill old Reelfoot, but eventually took a break because being outsmarted by a grizzly bear weighs on a man's self-esteem. Over time, Wright thought of when he first encountered old Reelfoot. He recalled how he saw that big old grizzly bear rush from the edge of the trees near his pasture toward his prized bull. The bull only had time to lift its head and snort before old Reelfoot was on him. With one mighty swipe of the bear's paws, that big bull went down, deader than a doornail. Just to make sure, old Reelfoot crushed the bull's spine in his signature move to keep his prey from getting away. Wright flashed back to how he immediately dashed for his rifle, pulling it from the buckhorn gun rack in his living room. He worked a shell into the rifle's chamber and put a few more in his pocket before slipping back out of the cabin. As he approached his pasture, Wright took a wide arcing path that brought him to within 100 yards of his now dead bull. He couldn't see the bear, so he crept in closer to within 25 yards. Wright remembered cocking his head to listen for any noise, a twig cracking, a small rock tumbling down an embankment, but heard nothing. The bear had given him the slip, and he searched for soft ground to examine for tracks. Sure enough, he found the tracks of old Reelfoot. These memories ate at Wright until they grew into motivation. He knew either him or that bear must go. Wright devised a clever plan to kill old Reelfoot and recruited a neighbor boy of only 17 years of age, Pearl Bean, to help him. The boy was a natural in the woods and could track a beaver across a pond. Another local rancher, Pedro Smith, along with two others, joined the hunting party. The hunting party headed out on April 4th. Pearl packed his .44-40 Winchester hunting rifle and a 9-inch long hunting blade with him. Wright carried his .56-52 rimfire Spencer rifle and lots of venison jerky and ammo. It wasn't too long into the hunt before the 5-man hunting party decided to split up to cover more ground. Wright and Bean decided they would go one way and the other 3 hunters headed off in another direction. After Bean and Wright found old Reelfoot's fresh tracks, they returned to camp to tell the other hunters. The men followed the tracks for several miles and spotted the giant bear a few miles away across the canyon. One of the hunters released his hounds, despite the others objecting. The hunters pursued the bear for several hours, but returned to camp dejected and exhausted. They decided to return home and come up with a new plan to kill the wily old bear. On their way home, Wright and Bean decided to try to find the bear again the next day without the other hunters and their hounds. The 2-man hunting party mounted their horses on April 5th and set out following old Reelfoot's tracks. They pitched camp for the night and slept by the coals of their fire beneath the stars. As soon as the sun rose, the men were back in the saddle trying to catch up on old Reelfoot, whom they believed probably traveled through the night. At times there was abundant sign the bear had been in the area. They would find logs torn open by the bear as it searched for insects.
At other times, they would have to spend valuable time scouring the ground for any sign at all that the big bear had traveled through. Soon enough, they figured out the big bear knew they were following him. They may have been close enough that he caught their scent on a breeze. Either way, his tracks made a beeline for the roughest and highest country the Siskyou Mountains offered. Old Reelfoot led the men through tangled brush and through steep canyons until they followed him into the snow-capped peaks of the range. On April 10, 1890, William Wright and Pearl Bean led their horses into a clearing, and there stood old Reelfoot, just 80 yards away. The giant bear instantly knew he was in a fight for his life. He stood to his hind legs and stretched out his paws toward the men, in a way venting his rage at their pursuit. The bear rocked forward and onto all fours before speeding toward the men, who immediately dismounted their horses. They could see the rage in the bear's eyes, glowing like embers in a fire, and watched as the steaming air puffed from his lungs into clouds alongside the bear. Wright pulled his rifle stock to his cheek and aimed at old Reelfoot's throat before squeezing the trigger, and immediately working his action to reload. Bean had dropped to one knee and was firing his rifle as quickly as he could work the action, driving .44 caliber slugs into the bear's chest over and over. The bear's only reaction was more ferocity, as none of the slugs could slow its approach. As it streaked toward the men, old Reelfoot bit branches and tossed them, and swiped at snow and sticks, sending debris flying in all directions. At a distance of just 30 yards from the men, old Reelfoot stumbled and then collapsed. The blood and the snow all around him bore the truth of the path of each bullet the men had fired. But the giant bear wasn't done yet. He slowly regained his feet and sniffed the air, as if he were unsure of just where the men had went. Finally picking up their scent, old Reelfoot again began to run toward Wright and Bean. Both men fired simultaneously at the back of the bear's throat in desperation to end its progress toward them. Just 20 feet from the men, old Reelfoot suddenly piled up. Old Reelfoot was finally dead, and his days of killing livestock were ended. Bean's 9-inch hunting knife was used as a means to measure the size of the bear. Its body was 8 feet long, and its chest was 40 inches wide. Its claws estimated to be 4.5 inches in length, and its ears were 10.5 inches apart. The distance around the massive bear's muzzle was 42 inches from ear to ear, and they estimated it weighed 1,800 pounds. Now keep in mind, these were cattlemen, and estimating a big animal's weight was commonplace for them, so I tend to trust their estimate. As they skinned the bear, they counted 10 bullet holes at least in its hide, and noticed its teeth were worn short. They also found Cook's .38-55 rifle round, which had flattened itself upon impacting old Reelfoot's shoulder bone. Once skinned, old Reelfoot's hide was mounted and placed on a wagon for paying customers to see, for a small fee. Eventually, old Reelfoot's stuffed exhibit was lost to time, but soldiers returning from World War I insisted they had seen the bear exhibited while in Europe. A museum in Wairika, California still displays one of old Reelfoot's claws in remembrance of a bear that many ranchers feared. William Wright's nephew, George, still lives near the town of Hornbrook and still has his uncle's old .56-62 Spencer hunting rifle that killed old Reelfoot. Well, that was an amazing story of a magnificent bear. After reviewing the details surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think if old Reelfoot didn't have all those cattle to eat, that he would have turned to eating people? Would old Reelfoot have been killed by other hunters or ranchers if Wright and Bean hadn't pursued him on his own territory? Would you like to live in a remote ranch surrounded by hungry grizzly bears? I will enjoy reading and answering your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.